WNY Coaches Chalk Talk podcast. Glad to have you back. This is Rich Jacob with Coach Blair Lipsitz. And again, returning as our guest, and so thankful to have him, is Joe Schaefer, attorney from Lipsitz Matthias LLP. Welcome back, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Coaches, excuse me. Fired up to be back. I think we've got an awesome topic today, and just psyched to be on the podcast. We had a lot of fun last time. I know I spoke for most of it, so I'm looking forward to a little bit more discussion.
Right?
Well, there should be more back and forth today for sure, I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
We appreciate you being here. Coach, want to introduce us to the topic?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about pay for play and what that means, and I think we're just going to dive right into it. Should athletes be paid for what they do in a college setting? So I'm going to send it over to you first so you can just kind of talk about what is pay for play.
Sure.
Just on a general level.
Yeah. And I think the first distinction, just because it's been so newsworthy recently that I want to point out, is pay for play is not NIL or name, image, and likeness compensation. I think a lot of folks right now are trying to figure out, all right, well, NIL, we're done. The kids are getting paid. I think yesterday was it Paige Beckers just signed a huge deal with Gatorade, which is really cool and great for her. But that is not, at least per my understanding of pay for play, that is name, image, and likeness compensation that is coming from a third party, not a university, not a conference. That's coming from Gatorade LLC or whatever Gatorade's massive management company is, and going directly to Paige. Now, Paige is going to have to take that to her compliance officer. At UConn, there's going to be different vetting processes. But that's NIL, right? That's not even pay for play.
Which a lot of people don't know that that's a difference.
Right. And, I mean, you can go off on whether or not NIL is permissible and where we come down. And I'm sure that might get into our conversation today. But obviously the NCAA has completely changed its stance on that due to a lot of mounting outside pressures from state and federal legislation, as well as LeBron James on his HBO show, which I thought that was very cool.
I think that was like a catalyst, right? For people to be fired up about it, more fired up about it.
Yeah. And he's been behind the scenes for a while doing things. He produced a few documentaries on, what it's like to be a college athlete and the financials behind that, and what, the financials the universities experience, colleges and universities experience versus what, the financials that the players have. But that's all in the NIL realm.
Right.
And pay for play, at least as I like to say, is and I don't know if this is legal or not, but this is my understanding, or the definition of how I would define pay for play, is direct payment from a school to an athlete for the sole purpose of competing in athletics for that school. Now, this is where it can get tricky, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, but there's a lot of questions as to how that can be organized, whether that includes scholarship money or not, because I think a lot of folks, and this is probably an argument that'll come up today.
First argument,
well, they're getting paid wherever, $60,000 a year in academic tuition. Does that count in the pay for play? Nobody knows yet because pay for play doesn't exist. But at least in the way I like to define it, and if you guys want to jump in and tell me it's not a great definition or there's limitations, which I'm sure there are, the way I like to look at pay for play is direct payment from a school to the athlete for their participation in athletics.
In athletics
solely. Yeah. Yes.
And I mean, this eventually will get to a point where will they be academically held to a standard to maintain that? If they're pay for play and it's based on athletics. Whereas as a student athlete, if you don't do your part academically, that money can be taken away sometimes depending on what the situation is.
All in the terms of the agreement?
Yeah. And I mean, in an NLI, it outlines what can and can't happen. And they're not very specific, but they're specific enough that it can't be athletically driven to take away a scholarship. So this is athletically given.
Right.
And therefore, can it be taken away because of an academic situation? Is that going to be a part of it? It's got to be. If it's college, I don't know.
You mean, Coach, like a separate stipulation regarding academics that might be different than the scholarship itself?
If they're getting paid and they're getting their scholarship, is that going to happen? Could that happen? They don't know yet, right?
Yeah. Well, let's get back. To them getting paid and they have the scholarship. If the scholarship, again, yes, the scholarship covers many things.
Yeah.
Now you both are Division I athletes. So talk a little bit about your scholarship, what it included.
Yeah, and it depends. It depends on the sport because every sport is paid differently for scholarships. I played volleyball, and volleyball on the women's side was an all or nothing. You are like a full ride. I mean, you can do, it's tough to explain, but you can be on full for a year and then off for a year or something like that, but you can't give like $10,000 to someone. That's not the way it works. Yeah, partial money doesn't work that way.
Is that a school decision in a lot of cases? Because I know that a lot of times, at least in my experience with it, I think it's a Title IX play where you don't, just in order to make sure that the scholarships are given out and you ensure that your ratio is correct and your equal representation among the genders and the men's and women's sports. I admittedly never did compliance at that level. Yeah, but it seems to be obviously much more common in women's sports and men's sports. But
yes.
I don't mean to, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. And so for me, I'll just speak to my experience as an athlete instead of a coach, but I would say it was pretty similar. It covers your tuition, it covers your living, and that has changed. Now you can get extra money for that. You can live off campus and get extra money for that. It covers food. It covers, what else does it cover? All of your travel as an athlete, all of your gear, all of your medical issues that you might incur, during your time, which mine were pretty high, I'm sure. Thank you, Penn State. Just, sort of an all-encompassing approach to what an athlete has. That being said, you have a meal plan that is set, and I have heard that, people want more food, like the meal plan isn't enough food, so that was something that was a big issue. Or, in certain areas of the country, maybe the stipend that you're given for housing is too low, and but you could probably always live on campus.
Raised to the market value.
Yeah.
So now we have the art student with the special talent, and we have the music student with the special talent, and but their activities don't have the TV contracts maybe that major sport has, and perhaps their scholarship could be academic. They could have some scholarships, they couldn't. So now we talk about equity. I know we brought up Title IX. That's a whole other podcast, as we all know.
Yeah.
Right.
But mainly because of the millions and millions of dollars that football brings. Right. I mean, it's so hard to find equity when we talk about the Title IX. But just back to the equity, fairness, or the student who maybe doesn't have a special talent but is there paying full tuition.
Right.
How do we or can we consider everyone when we're talking about this? Because on one hand, without question, I mean, right? I think I've seen Michigan football on the cover of Forbes magazine, right? Because of the ROI, because of return on investment, because of how many millions and millions of dollars that they make related to all the above, from TV to gate. So we get it that the institutions certainly benefit more than financially, but right here we're talking about pay for play, and I like your definition, by the way, Joe. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Coach.
And I think that there is a reality of the dollars, and they are coming to the institution. And
I wonder if there was a guilt there, right, where all this money's coming in, and they were like,
yeah,
should we probably talk about paying the athletes now? And that's kind of I wonder if that's how it happened, or if athletes found out, or if, coaches found out, or whatever it was. Like, how did this become something that was a conversation? Because I mean, I'll throw my 2 cents out there. I don't think athletes should be paid in college. That's my thought. I've lived that life. And it is, I think a lot of people outside of athletics underestimate how much time goes into an athlete's life. 100%, right? But I also think that my experience, and I've played pro too, so I've
you
seen
have been
both
paid
sides.
as a pro.
I have, right? So I loved my experience not playing pro and not being a professional during that time in my life in college. And when you go pro, it's a job, and it's a very, very different lifestyle, and you sort of lose some of that team aspect that a lot of us loved as college athletes. And while I understand all this money is coming in and like we got to figure out something to do with it, but why don't those athletes go pro? If they want to go pro, go pro. What is that? And I'm sure that there's an argument here. Maybe by the end of this podcast, I'll be like, yeah, all right, you're right. I was telling you guys earlier, every time I debate, I'm like, I understand that. Maybe they should get paid. But no, like the college, whatever it is, needs to be upheld because it's something special. And it's like I don't want to ruin it with money for the athletes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No.
So that's my current where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I guess we go around the room here. I'm.
You don't have to, but I'm just throwing it out there.
No, I mean, I appreciate that, and again, someone who has lived it on both levels,
right?
A major college scholarship situation, and then pro. It's coming from someone like you is really helpful for all of us, because again, you just embraced the experience as a college athlete. Yes, you were rewarded for your talents with full scholarship and
exactly
and all those things.
I got an education, right?
Right. And there's a lot said about that by itself. I agree with you.
Right.
Like my first instinct when we hear about pains is like, they're already being rewarded.
Right. So many resources that other students do not receive.
Yeah.
And maybe they have them, but they don't have as easy of access to them.
Yeah. And I have to say, this is, I guess, the beauty of podcast is, I hear things like, before every game there were, we were allowed, the NCAA allowed us 2 tickets for every game. Right. And if we didn't want to use those tickets, then somebody sold those tickets for us. So when they opened their locker for the tickets, there was, $300 in cash instead of the tickets.
I'm pretty sure that's illegal now.
Well, as I'm saying,
I don't know if it is, but I don't think you can do that anymore.
You hear about tractors and houses being painted.
Right,
I mean, we all understand that that's part of it too. So
I'm like, I took that NCAA test every year. I don't think you can do that.
And again, another time for another podcast, but
for sure.
But,
I mean, I remember hearing Bobby Knight in the interview and said, look, if I wanted to do it another way, I would just have a shoebox full of money and I would get players every day. But he, as it stood, or as we all believed, or some of us, I guess, speak for myself, that he like many, ran a clean program.
Right.
So, and again, I don't want to digress.
Right.
But I had to bring it up.
It's part of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Coach, you make a great point there, because it's all the way the NCAA's model, and this may get a little bit academic here, but this is the lens that I approach the question from, is the NCAA's model is based upon integrity, right? Mm-hmm. It's a self-policing organization.
Right.
Louisville didn't do a great job self-policing itself. Self-policing. Right. Excuse my language. Right. There's, Jerry Tarkanian had his own issues. I know that was before I was born. Coach, you may be able to give us a little bit more on that. But my favorite Jerry Tarkanian quote is, the NCAA is so mad at Kentucky, they just gave Cleveland State another 2 years of probation. And it's this, the NCAA is in this catch-22 situation where the importance of a Penn State football program, or Duke in basketball, Kentucky, name whatever your big powerhouse, Alabama in football, right? Georgia right now at the top of the rankings. I mean, Duke, Kansas. We could go on forever and list those schools. Right. They're so important to the NCAA's brand. Mm-hmm. How can you really punish them without ruining the idea of amateur sports? Mm-hmm. And so all we've done, and I think this is where my disappointment and where I ultimately came down on this, is the money's coming in regardless.
Right.
It's just where is it going?
Where's
The
it
money
going?
isn't just coming from television contracts, as we saw with the DeAndre Ayton scandal at Arizona, which is kind of where I first made my mark in talking about this stuff. I mean, that was $100,000, an alleged, $100,000 payment for him to go to Arizona. And, Blair, you said, and I think that I have the same pride in Davidson that you have in Penn State. DeAndre Ayton was quoted saying he didn't care where he went to play college basketball as long as the money was right. Cam Newton's dad was out there shopping him around for who was going to give him the most money to go and play at those schools. So he starts at Florida and he ends up at Auburn winning a national championship. Look, I understand that there's a lot of stories, and I could sit here and we could look at all the newsreels and all these FBI investigations. And I think that the distinction that I want to draw, because I completely understand, I would never play professional anything, okay? But I did play a pretty high-level Division I with some success, not really the success that you experienced. But what I think is important to recognize, at least in my mind, is that the way that we've built up our athletics departments is they're so heavily dependent on football and basketball for the most place, especially in the mid-major and the lower-level Division I, 100%. Division II, and then Division III. The people who are generating the most money for the NCAA itself, are basketball players because of the March Madness contract. Then we also have, which is wild, right? $1 billion in revenue. $1 billion in revenue for the NCAA based off March Madness.
For the
in
NCAA.
Addition to college football playoff for the NCAA.
Say that again, Coach.
Yeah.
For the NCAA. Now, you also have your conference contracts, or in Notre Dame's case, your own contract with NBC.
Right.
And you have the ticket gate. And so what do these guys do? They build these massive facilities, right? And say, oh, well, we're going to fund volleyball, or we're going to fund tennis, or we're going to fund track with football money. But football can't get paid because they're the same as the golf team. And that's where I come down on it. And I think as much as I want to pretend, and I gave a speech to this effect in my public speaking class my junior year as to why college athletes shouldn't get paid, because I would look at the basketball guys different. And then I thought about the speech I gave, and I didn't believe myself because I understood that the only reason that my scholarship existed outside of endowments,
yeah, that's very true,
and the facilities that I got to play on was because the Davidson basketball team, and in particular, number 30, Stephen Curry, did so much for my school. He brought in a crop of recruits that the school had never seen before. And for a small school like Davidson,
it makes a huge impact.
It's a huge impact. And Steph never saw a cent. And I'm not saying that Steph needed to get paid boatloads of money, but the impact that he and Coach McKillop have had on that university has been amazing. And for the basketball guys to do what they do and to fill that stadium and to basically finance an athletics department, and I understand I'm generalizing here, and there's a lot more finances that go into it. And I don't mean to use my alma mater as an example. I can just only speak to my experience. I think the fairness kind of goes out the window where, you guys, I mean, Blair, you played at the marquee college volleyball program, right? I didn't play in that tennis situation, but I understood my value to the university. I was a cost. I was not profitable. But if you look at the economics, and there's a ton of studies, I remember like in 2012 or 2013, the average revenue profit that a Duke basketball player, the 12th man on the Duke bench, was bringing in was like $1.5 million. Meaning if Zion Williamson 2 years ago is at Duke, he's probably netting Duke 8, 9, 10.
Wow.
So then does it become more about not being able to use the athletes in media, in whatever it is, if you're not going to pay them? Because right now they're using athletes, right, to push the brand, and maybe that's what's not okay.
Right.
You mean like as
Zion Williamson, right?
Yeah.
Like the NCAA
face of this institution.
Oh yeah, puts him all over, whatever.
He's on the ESPN commercials, and that's licensed by the university to ESPN by virtue of their contract with the ACC.
So that's where I'm just like, can't really do that and not pay the guy for doing that, right? Because he's doing all of that for the university on top of, I never did anything like that with my time and I'm sure you didn't either as a student athlete, right?
No.
Like we would do little mini ESPN interviews and stuff before national championships and things like that. But I mean, it was like right after practice, and it was very quick and it was exciting. It wasn't like a drain on my academic schedule.
Another full task that you
Yes,
have to
it wasn't
develop.
a separate job.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where it seems like some of these guys are essentially having a second job building someone else's brand.
Or it's their first
Or
job.
their own.
It's their first job, and,
Right.
and I think you see those circumstances. I
That's
remember
sad,
Rich
isn't it?
Rodriguez's Michigan football team got in trouble because they were doing 60 hours a week. Well, of
Yeah.
course they're doing 60 hours a week. So is everybody else. Their compliance officer just didn't cover that up.
Right.
Right.
Captain's practices. Don't tell me you never had a captain's practice that wasn't instructed to you by your.
Right.
Hey guys, I think it might be a good idea to have a captain's practice.
Right. You should probably go
You should
and do
probably
an X,
do
Y, or
that.
Z.
No, coach.
And like the
No,
coaches
coach.
don't
Sorry, I'm on
come.
scholarship. No way, man. I'm not doing that. Okay, coaches aren't there. Well, tell me about captain's practice.
Right.
That never happened.
Right.
Okay, well, Rich
Exactly.
Rodriguez apparently had 8 captain's practices a week, but still.
And he was there for him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there's again, it comes down to self-policing, but
Yeah.
I guess in terms of pay for play, just to kind of circle back, and Coach, you may have been heading just to get us back on track, but the reason I come down in favor of pay for play, it's not because I don't think the answer to pay for play is if you are the best volleyball player on Penn State's team, you're netting $1 million.
Right.
I don't think we get to that level unless
Right.
you have the boosters or the financial resources that are coming into the
Right.
athletics department to fund that. What I think, and I think this is why I think pay for play is fundamentally fair, is because it's become the way that the NCAA's financials work and the way that Power 5 school financials have begun to work, and big time mid majors, especially schools with good basketball programs, right? And you have hockey and baseball,
Yeah.
and obviously when I say basketball, I mean men's and women's basketball. I want to make sure that that's clear, just obviously. And I think that women's basketball has done an amazing job of branding and being.
Yes.
I love watching the tournament every year. I think it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Those are your revenue generators, and the NCAA makes that distinction in their Division I rulebook. There are
They do.
5 revenue-generating sports: men's and women's basketball, football, baseball, ice hockey. And up until recently, there was a transfer regulation that said it was called the one-time transfer rule, which I'm published on. Yeehaw!
Yeah.
Which is basically you can't transfer schools from in any of those 5 revenue-generating sports without sitting out a year because you needed a year in residence to get used to your new school. Now you can have a JUCO transfer
Yeah.
come in and play right away, and you
you
can
can.
do that in any other sport. But God forbid you're a football player or a basketball player or a baseball player and you want to transfer schools, you're sitting on the bench of the year for 1 year because guess what? The NCAA doesn't want free agency in college sports.
Yep.
And that is now out the door. The one-time transfer exception, which previously applied to all non-revenue generating sports, is now available in revenue generating sports. I think we saw that first with Jalen Hurts transferring from Alabama to Oklahoma. He was like the first person to really take advantage of it. But
Yeah,
I try to get us
transfer
back on
rules
track. But
also, we could have a whole other podcast on
Sure,
that because
sure.
that just
it's
Yeah.
nuts.
changed a
Well,
lot.
this new transfer portal. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess I was trying to get us back on track.
You are now. So again, you're coming down saying if it's fair,
Yeah,
fundamentally
fair. I wrote down fair too.
Yeah. So which is interesting because again, we cannot hide from the amount of money that's being generated
Right.
Yeah.
by these institutions, and institution rules first. You asked Blair about is that does the institution process and rules and regulations supersede the NCAA sometimes, Coach?
Say that again. Sorry.
In other words, if University of Buffalo
Yep.
decides ABC and what they'll do with their revenues, the NCAA governs it to a certain point, or does the institution
that's a
have
great question.
a right to supersede the NCAA in some aspects? I know that's a big, broad question.
No, but I think it's a good question. Ultimately, the NCAA's framework governs, right? There's different, no matter wherever you fall on the Division 1, 2, 3 scale, the rule books, and the NCAA just released a new constitution, which is attempting to kind of streamline the different manuals for the different divisions. But as long as you're operating within that framework, The problem is that framework is massive, and the way that those rule books have developed is violations over the past 40 years. So there's a rule for everything. There's a logo rule. We all know the 2-inch rule, right? You can't have a logo. You can't have a manufacturer's logo on your equipment or on your uniform.
This was an incredible thing at our every national championship.
It's wild. They're I mean, I'm sure they're checking you guys. They're measuring the logos on your jersey to make sure that Nike logo next to that Nittany Lion isn't more than 2 inches.
And if someone's calf was bigger than someone else's calf, right, and the Nike logo stretches, then we had to wear the embroidered ones because they didn't stretch.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
That's interesting.
They're looking at football players like, don't squat too much.
Right, exactly. Excuse me. But then, this whole idea of pay for play, how do you, talking about fairness, make sure things are fair throughout a conference, make sure that the Power 5 doesn't just, even more than it already is, soar, and the mid-majors are left behind like, well, we can't do that. We don't have the resources for that. And that was something that I never realized until I started coaching, right? Yeah. You don't think about it as a player. But then you're like, well, this is just, the gap is just getting wider and wider and wider.
Well, sorry, Coach, go ahead.
No, well said. Please continue, Joe.
I think it ultimately comes down to this idea that the NCAA has been pushing forever about competitive equity. Mm-hmm. There is no darn competitive equity in the NCAA, and I think that you will see that some people will actually argue, and I'd be one of them, that if you put pay for play in, that could actually encourage competitive equity. I think that pay-for-play will be regulated at the conference level, and the Power 5 are going to align based on their financials are all the same.
But it's really the only way you can do it, right?
Right. Give UB, look right in town. UB's had some very, very prominent athletics directors come in, and they've made big-time hires, and you've seen success because they've gotten great coaches and great players. Great coaches bring great players and good recruiting and just the process of it. And you got to work your tail off, and then what happens to these guys? They're gone.
They leave.
Bobby's at Arizona State. Right. Nate's down at Alabama now. Mm-hmm. I mean, and Lance just went to Kansas. Like it's we see these guys get scooped up because they have the money. Now that's coaches. Mm-hmm. What if you don't restrict a mid-major school like UB, and there's the state element to it, which is tough. Yeah. But say you're jockeying for position we'll use basketball as an example because I think one player can have a little bit more of an impact unless the top quarterbacks are going to go to the top or the Power 5 schools. They're all going to get scooped up. But what if you have the opportunity to offer a guy like $2 million to go play at Siena? Right? Well, I can give you $1 million, you can come to Duke. Yeah, but I'm going to get 2.5, and I'm going to go play at St. Bonaventure.
Yeah.
Right.
And you build your program around that person, and then all of a sudden we're not regulating, and you're saying, look, you have a budget, decide you guys can spend $10 million, and that could get into antitrust laws, which is a completely other podcast, which we've got to be careful about.
Right.
And the NCAA is already walking a very thin tightrope with antitrust right now anyways, and especially if you're going to restrict payments, that is an antitrust violation, plain and simple. Yeah. And that's in the Alston decision. But I think in terms of competitive equity, pay-for-play may actually help the mid-major and the smaller school so long as they can fund it, so long as your accountants are going to get the books right. Now, and the last argument I'll put on, because I know we're at time, and I always feel like I need to say it.
Professional levels. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so
there's a lot to think about there. The last thing I'll say is that one of the biggest arguments is, and I get this a lot, and I'm sure you would get this a lot if you came down the same way that I did on these things, is, and I've seen this written on a number of the blog posts that I've written on the UB Law Sports Forum, which is, all right, bud, you were a mid-major tennis player at a non-fully funded school. Tennis doesn't exist in the pay-for-play NCAA. Tennis doesn't exist. And I love that comment because I would say to that person, I say, look, tennis doesn't exist in the pay-for-play NCAA in the same way that current athletics departments are funded. Mm-hmm. If you are going to rely on football, basketball, whatever it is, to finance your athletics department, and then everybody's getting paid, yes, that will restrict my tennis budget. That doesn't mean there isn't other money out there to finance these programs.
That's right.
Right? And I think that's what bothers me the most. Blair, you talked about this, and I think this, or maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way you were talking about your experience at Penn State, you were like, this is what I did. It was such a unique experience. It was not professional. And that was the reason that I think you enjoyed it. And again, I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
How many, and I understand people don't have good experiences in college athletics, but for 4-year starters or 2-year starters or people who work their way into the starting lineup, and you look and you see folks who, like me, will wax poetic about their careers. You don't think those people aren't going to mobilize to save their program, to get the funding, whether it's $1 million or $500,000, to get those endowed scholarships or to get that endowed budget every single year to make sure that other young people have the same opportunities that they did?
Right.
If I got a call tomorrow and said your program's in jeopardy of getting cut, I said, give me 6 months.
Right.
Give me 6 months and I'll find it.
Right.
I'll find it, because there are solutions that are not, we look to the revenue generators to finance the rest of the athletics department.
It used to be that you had to, oh man, I forget who was telling me the story. Everybody that wanted to play, they had to make the money for their program every year before they played. You're thinking, what?
Yeah.
Pre scholarships and all of this.
Well, Joe, I think you make a valid point without question. Like there are other resources and many people, alum supporters that will have the wherewithal and will absolutely support. So I think that's an excellent point. One thing for the listeners, can you talk a little bit about antitrust and NCAA walking that line? Maybe just antitrust by itself.
You're like, do we have 75 more minutes?
Yeah, I was going to say, if anybody wants to audit my amateurism and antitrust law class, I'd be more than happy to do it up at the law school this spring. No, I mean, look, the short, I'll try to do this in like 2 minutes, and I'll do my best to get from 1984 to 2021.
Appreciate you.
So in 1980,
this is gonna go viral.
Yeah, no. Well, oh god, here we go. Now I'm gonna get in trouble. Alex isn't here today to put the muzzle on me. So the first decision that the Supreme Court issued on the NCAA and antitrust is the first real big decision is called NCAA versus Board of Regents, and it was a case basically about television rights. And the NCAA used to restrict television rights of its schools, and the schools were like, really? Like, just because Alabama's played twice in a 2-year period, why can't we televise the Iron Bowl? It's Alabama versus Auburn, number 1, number 2 for a spot in the national championship. This is crazy. They sued. NCAA loses the case, but is granted this crazy antitrust protection, which basically says the NCAA deserves ample latitude to govern the revered tradition of amateurism in the United States, and therefore all of their bylaws, or at least the way that the lawyers argue it, are presumptively pro-competitive under United States antitrust law, because you have what the NCAA is. They're a top-heavy organization, but they govern all these member institutions, and what it's called is it's a horizontal restraint on trade, where Coach at Medaille, me at Davidson, you at Penn State, all the administrators agree to abide by the same rules and the same monetary restrictions on paying athletes and doing what they do with the money. And they're agreeing to basically compete and, more importantly, not compete with one another under certain restrictions. 1984. Then you see the O'Bannon case in 2013, which attacks NIL. You see the Alston case, which just gets decided, where the Supreme Court basically said, yeah, that whole thing in Board of Regents, we're not going to give you that same protection. And like additional challenges to the NCAA's model could be vulnerable. And obviously the noteworthy decision, I think I'm already at 2 minutes, so I blew that. But was Justice Kavanaugh's decision was the NCAA is not above the law. And that's a straight up antitrust pronouncement that says, look, if you guys are going to conspire like this to restrict the payment to student athletes based on all the money that is coming into your organization, and you continue to justify that based on the NCAA of 1984, you have another thing coming, the next suit that comes our way. If it does and you guys don't organize, it's a shot across the bow. Don't expect much mercy from us if the plaintiffs plead it the right way. So to me, that means if we run afoul of NIL and we do that the wrong way and we're restricting NIL, or we're going out of our way to restrict pay for play in a way that's unfair to the student athletes, which you get the right plaintiff's attorney who writes the right complaint, that could be it. I think the pressure is really on the NCAA to figure out a way to fairly compensate their athletes. If they can keep it within the restrictions that they currently have, so be it. But antitrust law is no longer favorable to the NCAA, at least the way that I read that case, and that's more of a personal opinion than this is not legal advice. I need to say that. Oh shoot, I almost forgot that. But that's where I see. I think the NCAA's model is once again ripe for challenge, and frankly it's more vulnerable than it ever has been, and that's why I see pay for play coming down the pipeline in one way, shape, or form in the next decade.
I think what you said that really sums everything up for me is that this is not the NCAA of 1984.
It's not.
And we're still operating under that model.
The best.
So much more money involved. Much more.
The best part of that 1984 decision, I think it was written by Justice Stevens, but there's a dissent written by Justice White. Justice White was, I believe, an all-pro running back at Pitt. He played for the Steelers for a year. I think he got injured in his first year with the Steelers. He predicted the downfall of the NCAA. He predicted the $1 billion revenue streams. He said, if you let the TV contracts do what the schools are asking them to do, you will completely gut amateurism out of the NCAA because the money coming in is going to ruin it. He said that in 1984 before all this happened, but he was also the only one who knew about those
what it looked like
shoebox deals, Coach. He knew what the money was and what it could turn into, and here we are. And yet the NCAA, frankly, this is something that we talked about on my last podcast. Just don't want to share.
Yeah.
And all it is making sure that everyone is treated fairly. And I think that's where the student athletes, you asked us earlier, how did we find out about it? You see the money coming in, and none of it's heading your way. Somebody's going to say something at some point.
Right.
And here we are.
Joe Schaefer, your knowledge and wisdom really, really helped us today and helped our listeners. Thank you so much for being here. What a great topic. It's good. We had a couple sides, like there will always be, right? Perspectives, but thank you, and we look forward to talking further about this very important topic, pay for play, and the rest of what we're doing. If we have any questions, WNY Coaches is here to answer. Again, Rich Jacob, Blair Lipsitz, and Joe Schaefer signing off.